Hello everyone, this is Cody Lee of BlackCatBooks.org, author of I, the Dragon, Cruel and Beautiful, Rabbit Hole, and King Dio. A while back, there was a really interesting discussion on 4chan, the V-board, the Vidya games, talking about like plagiarized music in video games. Like people were discussing songs that they've heard elsewhere, used in commercials and things like that. And the discussion inevitably turned to like, what video game tracks have ripped off music. And a lot of people like brought up Nintendo, and I was busy thinking to myself like, I wonder how many iconic Nintendo tracks are straight up plagiarized. I wonder how much of this is exaggerated. I wonder how much of this is going on. I found myself like really invested in the conversation. I was interested in learning more about this topic. This fringe thing that I don't really know all that much about. I'm not a music person. As anyone who follows this channel knows, I was really interested in learning more, but I found myself like distracted by this very interesting sort of occurrence in this page, right? Like people were discussing like all these games that supposedly had plagiarized soundtracks, that supposedly had like all these things stolen from like other things, and nobody really noticed or cared, right? Like nobody was like, aggressively defending any particular piece or anything like that. People were just kind of sharing their experiences. One person in particular, it wasn't me, I will tell you this outright. One person in particular brought up the very real fact that Toby Fox plagiarized the entire OST from Undertale from a variety of different sources, particularly obscure 90s Japanese RPGs. And certain people flipped their shit. That particular post got a lot of responses insisting that, like, no, he didn't. You're just jealous. You're making it up. Like, that's not true. That's impossible. Toby Fox is a savant. And it really just, it really made me realize just how thin-skinned Undertale fans really are. Because this kind of thing happens all the fucking time when it comes to them. Like, I write a parody article about, like, Toby Fox being broke on the Hero 7, right? Like, he wasted all of his money on Deltarune. It's a joke, right? The most popular post I've made in a long time. I see numerous 4chan posts about it. I see numerous people, like, bringing it up. Like, I've seen people repost it. Like, big success for me, like, website-wise. But, like, the weird response I got from it was like baffling, right? Like this weird sort of just antagonistic attitude towards anyone being even remotely critical to Undertale. Like most people don't feel the way about Undertale like I do, that it's like literally the worst thing ever made, because most people don't know enough about it, right? Like most people just think Undertale is some weird thing that has a cult following, but like it goes a little bit beyond that, like it goes so far beyond that I think the fans of Undertale need to be condemned, like en masse. Like they need to be made fun of more. They need to be like shit on more, and like things like this, like things like Toby Fox being a plagiarist, need to be more widely known, understood, and accepted, because it is true. Like I know it's the case, but his most dedicated fans aren't willing to admit it or even entertain the idea that it could be true, right? Like that there might be chords or melodies that are, that Toby Fox ripped off from other games, right? Like they won't even suggest the possibility that Toby Fox may not be the savant indie game developer that he was built up to be, because he isn't. Like that's the thing I've been seeing about Deltarune since it came out, is that like the cracks are really starting to deepen when it are really starting to show when it comes to like Deltarune and Undertale and its fake as fuck fan base, right? I've talked about this before, but a lot of online communities, they seem more to revolve around the fan base itself rather than like the thing the fans supposedly like. You know what I mean? Like Metroid Dread, for example. When that came out, people discussed the game, the lore changes, the addition, the combat, things like that. Like there were a lot of things to talk about when it came to Dread. But when it comes to Undertale, like all anyone can seem to talk about is how great it is and how Toby Fox is the greatest thing ever. It comes off as fake and artificial. It doesn't feel real, right? And I'm constantly seeing people like Undertale fans come into other threads and try to say that like, oh man, Undertale, it's one of 4chan's popular things, and more I'm starting to see people say that like, no, it really isn't, and that's observable, right? Like if you search Deltarune immediately after the Nintendo Direct, nobody was looking up Deltarune shit. People were talking about the other games, like the new Kirby game, Metroid Dread. I think Breath of the Wild 2. Did that get a new trailer? There were so many games that were like so much more relevant. Bayonetta 3. There were so many games that were so much more relevant than Deltarune around that time, and like. If it wasn't for a few 4chan posts that it feels like a couple of hundred people are just spamming incessantly, I wouldn't think Undertale had a following at all. In fact, I don't. Like, it feels super forced, you know? Like, it feels like a handful of people are constantly trying to get people to talk about Undertale. And it just isn't working. And when anyone, like, really talks about the problems with Undertale, with Toby Fox, with like with his music in particular, like these people lash out. They freak out in a way that it isn't typical for fans of a property. It's bizarre, right? And it does need to be addressed.